Hey, welcome to the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe, and our headlines this week: the death of a 10-year-old by the name of Rebecca Baptiste has prompted Republican State Senator Karrin Werner to launch a new task force to review Arizona's child safety reporting laws, as well as the Department of Child Safety, and many current and former elected officials are applauding that move. Little Rebecca died at Phoenix Children's 3 days after being found unconscious and severely beaten July 27th in Holbrook, despite multiple reports of suspected abuse made by family members and her school. A bipartisan group of Arizona mayors is teaming up to fight for our state's share of the Colorado River after Arizona once again got an 18% reduction in that water for 2026 and is in negotiations for future sharing of the Colorado River's water. Arizona, by the way, holds junior water rights on the Colorado, meaning our state has been the first to face cuts during this ongoing drought because I guess nobody got the memo that we're a state with a lot of, desert and stuff. And Arizona's facing the possibility of even deeper reductions. And headline number 3, this week, Pew Research said that their reading of census data shows that the number of people illegally residing in the United States surged to an all-time high of 14 million in 2023 and is likely that high now, a major increase from 2010's 10 million. That 14 million, though, still falls well short of estimates that President Trump has put out there, but it is higher than the estimates of a lot of Democrats. All right, let's meet our guests today on the AZ Political Podcast. That's Karrin Taylor Robson.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Thank you for coming in. I appreciate this.
Glad to be here.
So she, of course, is a Republican running for governor. She grew up in Arizona, and after getting a degree in history and political science at ASU, Ms. Taylor Robson worked on President Ronald Reagan's Economic Policy Council as a staff assistant. That's the same position she held in President George H.W. Bush's Office of Cabinet Affairs. She left Washington in the 90s to pursue a law degree. You know what? Why don't you just tell your own story? After you came back to Arizona, got a law degree, you went into land use, right?
I did. But, on my way back to Arizona from Washington, I stopped in Nebraska.
Really?
And I worked for Governor KTAR in Nebraska.
Okay.
She was the first female Republican governor ever elected in the United States. And so she had a big role in my life as a mentor. I returned then to Arizona to work for Governor Fife Symington before going to law school.
Okay.
And so since graduating from law school now over 3 decades ago, I've been in the private sector, working primarily in land use and development.
And you ran for governor in 2022.
I did.
And despite having a pretty big war chest and the backing of, Governor Ducey at the time, former Governor Jan Brewer, former Governor Fife Symington, who you mentioned already, a lot of other people, you lost the Republican primary to Kari Lake.
Key distinction in this race is I have the complete and total endorsement of President Trump.
Okay.
Had I had his endorsement in my first run, I would be sitting here today as your governor.
Okay, so I was going to ask, what are you doing differently, and what different political landscape that you see right now, this go around and you run for governor, or maybe what's the biggest difference simply being the fact that it's not Kari Lake running also? Well,
it's very different. Like I said, having the president's endorsement is key. It's critical. When I started last time, I had 0% name ID. In fact, we always joke the polls had me at 2% with a 4% margin of error. So I literally started in the basement. My name ID is dramatically different now. We're over 80% statewide. And so as I travel the state, people know me. They already know me. I've got friends and volunteers and supporters now all over the state of Arizona. And having President Trump's endorsement matters. And he knows I will have his back on things that matter to all Arizonans, beginning with security, the safety and security of our communities. I will have his back, unlike our current governor who tries to thwart every attempt by the president to secure our border and our communities.
So I'll ask you a couple of the same questions that I asked your Republican rival in this go around, Andy Biggs, who's congressman currently in the East Valley. And let's go with that question. You mentioned President Trump. I asked him, where is he willing to stand up to Donald Trump when he thinks that something that the president suggests isn't right for Arizona, even though you might agree with 90% of his agenda? Are there breaks that you have with President Trump?
Well, I'll just start out by saying I agree with President Trump on all the major issues that matter to Arizonans. If we were ever to have a disagreement, I'll pick up the phone and call him and talk about it. And at the end of the day, I believe we would be in alignment on, the priority. Number one priority is the safety and security of our communities, which begins with the security of our border. And then the economy, much like President Trump. I'm not a career politician. He wasn't a career politician. He was a businessman who brought to the table business experience, knowing how to solve problems, knowing how to build something from nothing, knowing how to build and manage budgets, knowing how to hire and fire people, things that an executive does. That's what he's done his entire career. He's brought that to Washington, and we could see the results of that, having a businessman in charge as opposed to career politicians.
Is there any stated policy of Donald Trump's that you don't agree with, even if it's at the federal level, it has nothing to do with Arizona, someplace that there's a distinction between you two?
I've been asked that question before, and I'll tell you on the big issues, the answer is no. We don't have big disagreements. We both believe in allowing the private sector to work. That's what I will do. Here in Arizona, speaking of the private sector, in 3 short years, we've gone from number 1 in the country, number 1 in job growth, to number 47 under Governor Katie Hobbs. I don't know how you do that. Even if you tried, I don't know how you have such a precipitous decline. So our previous governor was a businessman. President Trump is a businessman. We know something about the economy and what makes an economy tick. And so on those issues that are the most important issues to Arizonans, we agree. Trying to find something we disagree on. He likes McDonald's. I like Taco Bell.
Okay. Well, okay. You know what? I'm perfectly fine with that. And I know a lot of people are like, that's not Mexican food. I know it's not Mexican food, but I can still like it, right? There's nothing wrong with that. So another question I asked Andy Biggs was when he was on the AZ Political Podcast the week before last, how will you govern differently from Democratic incumbent Governor Katie Hobbs? And this is a little different than what I asked him. How do you believe you'll govern differently than Andy Biggs?
Well, focusing on Governor Katie Hobbs, again, she's a career politician. She's been, in elected office for a couple decades now. And it shows, back to the Arizona economy. We have gone from number 1 in the country to number 47 almost overnight. She imposed a growth moratorium on housing, and all that has done is increase the cost of housing. And when I travel around the state, that's one of the first issues I hear about is affordability and the fact that many Arizonans cannot afford a house. So the first thing I'm going to do is lift that moratorium, but I'm going to put a moratorium on any new regulations in Arizona because, being on the other side of government my entire career, it is burdensome government regulations that hinders the ability to start and form your business and to grow your business. We've got to get regulations out of the way. And so that's the experience I've had is sitting across the table from government and its impact on the ability of everyday Arizonans to make a living. So I will bring that experience, and my opponents, quite frankly, don't have that experience. So
having faced off against it on the other side of the table, do you feel like in some ways you're hoping to join the monster?
No. I'm going to bring that experience. And, President Trump, he in his first administration, he campaigned on removing one new federal regulation, removing an existing one for every new regulation. Mm-hmm. By the end of his first term, he had removed 8 regulations for every new one. I mean, the regulatory burden in this country at all levels, the local level and the cities and municipalities, the state level and the federal level, that's what is the biggest hindrance to just unleashing this economy. And as a business person, I know firsthand how that impacts us, just like President Trump. We're going to get rid of them. We're going to get rid of we're going to question every regulation and get rid of regulations that are no longer necessary.
And this is something that Republicans have talked about for decades. It's something that President Reagan talked about, who you served with, right? But there are some regulations that I think even a lot of Republicans agree need to still be in place to protect the public?
Of course.
Which of those would you delineate?
Well, life safety issues, for example, at the local level, you got fire and life safety regulations. And those, of course, you got to look at very closely before you're going to repeal them. But there's a lot of regulations, unnecessary regulations. And then just as an example at the federal level, this is how far afield our federal bureaucracy has become. Our Constitution has 3 crimes enumerated: treason, piracy, and counterfeiting.
Right.
There are over 5,000 laws that carry criminal sanctions. But there are over 300,000 rules with criminal sanctions. Those rules are promulgated by unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats that can throw all of us in jail for, probably sitting here today, we're probably breaking some federal rule. I don't know.
Well,
but it's
me
the
breathing
rules.
is breaking definitely some rules.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's regulations that are legitimate. But the nature of bureaucracy, and I've seen this firsthand over the last 30 years, it's just regulation upon regulation upon regulation. And the government, even though these career politicians might think that they are doing good and may be well intended, they have no idea the impact on the private sector. And we need somebody with that private sector perspective to say, wait a second, is this regulation necessary? And what I'm saying is, day one, when I become governor, we're going to put a moratorium on any new regulation, and we're going to try and clear out the cobwebs and get rid of unnecessary regulations.
I think you alluded to states' rights a moment ago when you said, state laws, local laws that, regulate safety and these kind of things are proper. So let's take a look at states' rights, because President Trump just announced this week he wants to eliminate mail-in ballots across the U.S. I think it's kind of questionable if he can pull that off constitutionally, because I believe that goes to the states' rights. But do you think it's a good idea to eliminate mail-in balloting? I mean, we've been doing it in Arizona probably longer than anybody else. I think we've been very successful at it. It's very popular among Republicans, and I know this from my time in political consulting. Older folks turn out much more for elections, and they love mail-in voting. So would you like to see that done away with?
Well, in a perfect world,
Or is that one of those spots you disagree with the president on?
No, I think I absolutely agree with the president that we need to restore trust and integrity into our election process. Even here in Arizona, our legislature has attempted to restore some confidence and trust into our election system. But once again, Katie Hobbs vetoed that bill. She's vetoed like 450 pieces of legislation. That's one on day one I'm going to ask the legislature to send back to me, because we have to do everything we can to restore trust and integrity into our elections. And quite frankly, I'll go even further. I want a state holiday for Election Day.
Okay.
I showed up many years ago to cast my ballot, and there was a line around the church. Mm-hmm. And I knew in hindsight, a lot of people complained about it. I thought it was fabulous. To me, it was evidence that our democracy works. People showing up, standing in line to cast a ballot, our most fundamental right, and quite frankly, a privilege too. In a self-governing society like America, it was great. I mean, how often do we hear stories about people spending the night, to get a concert ticket,
right,
or a football ticket,
yeah,
and they complain about standing in line to vote? I'd like to make it a state holiday.
Okay.
I've spent a good part of my career advocating for civics education. In fact, I chaired the Joe Foss Institute when we did the civics education initiative requiring all high school seniors to take the citizenship exam in order to pass or to graduate from high school. Arizona was the first state in the nation to pass that. We then went around the country. It's now required in 33 states. I am a big advocate on civics and on history. Our kids need to understand it and understand the precious nature of this country. And so I think a state holiday on Election Day would go a long way to evoke that pride of ownership in this self-governing society. But we have to do things to restore trust in our system. And that's what President Trump is attempting to do.
And I think that bill that she vetoed would definitely restore some trust, especially since it would require us to publish results much sooner, but that doesn't get to the mail-in ballots. And I think a lot of people are like, hey, yeah, I love my right to vote. But I also don't have time to go stand in line. So
if they had the day off, they would have time.
Well, there's that. But I also can imagine, packing the kids up and we're going to Flagstaff, kids. I got the day off, right? But I could see that happening with a lot of folks. But this idea of mail-in ballots and then also watermarked paper ballots counted by hand is that not a little archaic?
Well, I think with technology, we're going to see a lot of different things, tried to make sure we have election integrity. I go back to, we could all recall, I assume, the hanging chads in Florida in the 2000 election. Florida was the laughingstock of the nation.
Yeah.
Today in Florida, they have election results the night of election. I want to get back to that here in Arizona. And that will go a long, so we can do it. If Florida could do it, we can do it. Let's just do that. Let's copy what they're doing and do that. And I think, I know the election integrity legislation that this legislature sent to our governor would have gone a long way to accomplish that goal.
I mentioned border numbers here in my open today. Pew Research estimates the number of people living in the U.S. this year is likely higher than the 14 million they believe were here in 2023. What part does the state of Arizona play in border enforcement? And since that won't really reduce the number of undocumented people who are currently living here, should Arizona have a role in helping federal authorities in their deportation efforts?
I believe they should. I believe, when I'm governor, I will have the president's back. We will work with federal law enforcement agencies to make sure that border is secure. President Trump has done a phenomenal job. I went down there many, many times in my first campaign during the Biden years, and the place looked like a landfill. You could stand there and watch busloads of illegal aliens coming across that border. You go down there today, and it is crickets. There is nothing going on. The Border Patrol agents are, actually have nothing to do. They're just sitting there waiting.
I don't know if they'd say that's true.
They probably wouldn't say that.
But
they actually get to do their They get to do their job now.
Right. Instead of herding people into centers, right?
Right. And President Trump did that without needing a new law. He just did it. And his goal of getting the most violent criminals out of this country, I absolutely support that. I mean, rapists and murderers. I mean, some of the stories we're hearing about some of these violent criminals that are here illegally, get them out. And I will do everything I can. It goes back to my number one priority, safety and security of our communities. That's why I now enjoy the endorsement of multiple law enforcement agencies, because they know that is my number one priority. And I will work with the president, not against him, to make sure that the people of Arizona are safe and secure. And part and parcel of that is the inflow of drugs coming in from Mexico and other places coming through Arizona. I had a border sheriff tell me that they estimate 85% of the drugs coming into the country come in through Arizona.
Yeah.
That's not good.
I believe it.
We are at the point of the spear. And so we sure as heck better be good partners with the federal government to make sure that's, because Arizona gets a disproportionate economic burden, not just the human toll and the criminal element, but the economic toll on the state of Arizona. So you bet I will be working with the federal government to make sure that we keep our border safe and secure. That border sheriff you mentioned, that wouldn't happen to be my friend Mark Daniels, would it? Well, I was with Sheriff Daniels just last week in Cochise County. He's such just a good down-to-earth guy. But what I find fascinating, what happened during the Biden years, is the Tucson Border Patrol sector was the highest rate of people illegally crossing of any Border Patrol sector, New Mexico, Texas, or California. And they were bringing people in from other Border Patrol sectors and dumping them in Bisbee. Absolutely insane. But are there exceptions to these deportations? People like Kelly Yu, who owns 3 businesses in Peoria. She's been here for 20 years. She kind of checks all the Republican boxes. I mean, she came to the U.S. so that her baby wouldn't be aborted by the Chinese Communist Party, the authorities there. Besides the fact that she has resided in the United States illegally for 20 years, she's otherwise kept her nose clean. She's a job creator. She has 70 employees. Are there exceptions to people being deported? Well, there's certainly human, tragedies that occur anytime you're trying to solve bigger problems. But we got to focus on the bigger problem. I mean, think about the 300,000 children that were brought across this border and we don't know where they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Think about the millions of illegals that have been brought across the border and now are literally indentured servants, right? They can't get out of the grip of the cartels. We have got to stop that. We have got to break that. They are living in our midst, and they are, they're being exploited as we speak.
Right.
And so, as J.D. Vance said, if you're going to sit down and have a sandwich, you're not going to put the whole thing in your mouth at once. You're going to take a bite at a time. Mm-hmm. And the president and the policies of President Trump and immigration officials is to get the worst of the worst out of here first.
Right.
And that's their focus.
But I think a lot of people would argue, even a lot of Democrats would agree that that's absolutely true. In fact, President Obama, ejected a lot of criminals out of the United States that were here illegally. But there's also a lot of Republicans that are like, the Kelly Yous of the world are kind of an exception.
Right.
So.
And I'm going to assume those will be managed appropriately.
Yeah. Well, we can all hope, right? So what do you see as your first act as governor of Arizona if you win that election? What would be the first piece of legislation that you'd propose?
Election integrity.
Okay.
Election reform. Absolutely. But I have a whole list of things that I want to do.
Wait a second. Is that not politician navel gazing?
No, because like I said, Florida in 2020 was a laughingstock of the nation.
Right.
Today, everybody's scratching their head asking, why can't Arizona count? Well, we can. So we just need to create a legislative and a legal framework to allow that to happen. We have to do that. And it should be a very easy fix. They already have the legislation. And I got a pen, so it'll be a very easy fix to do quickly. But there's a whole list of other things I'm going to be doing day one.
Okay, let's hear it.
Okay, first thing we're going to do is we're going to have an Office of Government Accountability, a DOGE, Arizona DOGE, to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse in state government. You've probably read about all of the fraud in Access and the sober living scandal. It is unbelievable how that happened and how it was allowed to go on. Mm-hmm. We have state agencies that don't talk to each other. We have this thing called technology. We should learn to use that. And we are going to do everything we can to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in government. I'm also going to, day one, establish a governor's office of congressional accountability, because I do not believe our congressional delegation works cohesively on issues that matter most to Arizona. So
what would that look like?
Well, it's going to be a staff member that works with the business community and our delegation we're going to be there to help them prioritize things. So one thing I haven't talked about is for the last 20 plus years, I've been a staunch advocate and supporter of the United States military, starting with work that I did to support Luke Air Force Base and the continuing mission of the base. Long story short, I have served on the United States Air Force Civic Leaders Group for the Chief of Staff of the Pentagon for 20 plus years. And during that time, I got to work with civic leaders from around the country, and I watched how congressional delegations in other states work together. Alabama, Florida, Ohio, and what they advocate for their state to Washington, not Washington to their state.
Right.
And there are issues, some things that people might consider mundane, like, land use policy or, military priorities, flood control, the list goes on and on, things where states like Arizona are disproportionately negatively impacted from the eastern states. And I think that is unacceptable. And, in the defense of our delegation, nobody has ever helped them prioritize. Well, I'm going to be there to help them prioritize. I'm also, like we talked about earlier, I will have the president's back on border security, and that can start day one. We will signal to the administration and every law enforcement agency in the state of Arizona that I will have their back to secure the borders and keep our communities secure. And I also am going to impose requirements that third graders know how to read. or they won't become fourth graders.
Maybe you'd have an enforcement task on that.
We certainly would. Arizona has done some phenomenal things when it comes to education and parental involvement and parental choice in education, which I applaud and will do everything I can to support. And we've done, we've got some of the highest performing schools in the country, which is great. We have to continue to promote.
But overall, not performing very high.
We are not performing very well. In fact, in third grade reading, and that's why everybody's going to know about third grade reading before I'm done. Okay. You spend your first 3 years learning to read, and you spend the rest of your life reading to learn. So if you don't know how to read, when you matriculate from third to fourth grade, you're going to fall behind. And to me, that's unconscionable to that child. But as a matter of public policy, think of the cost, because we'll be subsidizing that child for the rest of their life. And so other states, and I'll just call out Mississippi and the Mississippi Miracle. Never thought I would, tell you we're gonna follow Mississippi's lead, but this is what they have focused on. If you can't read at third grade level, you're not going to become a fourth grader. And they put resources behind that, and I will too. But we will, every parent, every grandparent, every teacher, administrator, student, everybody is going to understand the importance of third grade reading. And in Mississippi, their high school graduation rates have improved. Their dropout rates have improved. Reading scores, of course, have gone through the roof. And their math scores have improved. Just think about it. If you can't read, you can't do a math problem.
Yeah.
And so we're going to focus on a lot of things when it comes to education. I was am a mom, and all of my kids had different educational pathways. I served on a K-12 school board. I served on the Arizona Board of Regents. Right. I currently serve on the Creighton University Board of Trustees. I serve on the American Council of Trustees and Alumni. So I have a bird's eye view of higher education. But my point is, I have a lot of perspective on education. There's a lot of issues in education. But day one, we're going to focus on third grade reading.
We had State Superintendent Tom Horn here on the AZ Political Podcast last week, and I pointed out how low we are. I don't think we rise above 45th anywhere in any metric when it comes to education. And I told him personally, I've supported choice in education. My kids have gone to both charter and, public district schools as well. But it's also kind of sad that we're this many years into school choice, the school choice experiment, if you will, in Arizona, and we haven't seen all boats rise. Like that was kind of the promise of school choice. Do we need to have a little bit more regulation when it comes to school choice? What's the secret there to getting that to work the way it's supposed to work?
It's about setting expectations. I mean, if you look, U.S. News and World Report just came out with their rankings. Mm-hmm. The top 10 high schools in Arizona, top 10, every single one of them are a BASIS charter school.
Right, yeah.
BASIS sets expectations that, are so high, I'm not sure I could go there. But, it's a tough school, and they have high expectations. And we have other charter schools that are highly performing that set expectations. My kids, spent time in a charter school organization. They did phenomenal because the expectations. That's why we're back to third grade reading. We're going to set that expectation. Every child will know how to read in third grade, or they're not going to become fourth graders. If we set that expectation, the ripple effect, the benefit of that, going back to Mississippi, graduation rates up, dropout rates down, math scores up, reading scores through the roof.
Yeah, it's interesting. My wife is a public school teacher, happens to also be a Republican public school teacher. And she would love to see, of course, higher teacher salaries. So I'll ask you if that's something that would be in your plans as governor to propose to the legislature. But she also says, but that means that the bad teachers also get a raise. She's not thrilled about that. But how do you feel about teacher salaries? Do we need to raise them?
I would love our teachers to be the highest paid teachers in the country. I would also like our teachers to be paid for performance and merit. Just like raising the expectations of our school kids, I want to raise the expectations of our teachers. And if we can get better performance out of the classrooms, then the teachers should be paid accordingly.
By the way, that would have been really easy when she was an actual classroom teacher. She works in the technology center. She's still a certified teacher, but she taught gifted. All her kids were 150 and above IQ. You got it easy when you got those kids. But, you also, as a regular classroom teacher, you have to deal with kids who don't have any support at home. And so it's almost not entirely the teacher's fault that kids don't perform well either, right?
Yeah, parents need to do their part. I was a single mom, 4 kids, building my business. So I know something about juggling. And was it easy? No, it was not easy.
Yeah.
You juggle, you get up every day and you go and you set better expectations for yourself. But parents have to, parents have a role in this. Mm-hmm. They need to expect more from their kids, and sometimes they need to expect more out of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a couple last questions here. Any thoughts on a running mate? Because now Arizona is going to have a lieutenant governor position, and it's decided the way we decide on a vice president. Whoever wins the nomination picks who's going to be by their side. Any idea on who that would be? Well,
I can tell you there's a long list of people who want that job. I have a lot of new friends.
Karrin. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of good people out there. One thing about the Republican Party and fellow conservatives, and a lot of conservative business leaders out there. We got a good list.
Any thoughts on maybe a former governor being a lieutenant governor? Because that would be an interesting little setup.
Yeah, right? No, I actually hadn't thought of that, but I will add that in the mix.
Have somebody coming right in by your side, like maybe Jan Brewer or Doug Ducey, who's already done the job. They'd be right there, your perfect consultant the whole time.
Right.
And then, okay, forgive me for this, but this is really Tom Horn's fault. Last week, he was on the AZ Political Podcast. One of the things he wanted to do was respond to his Republican primary opponent, Kimberly Yee, our state treasurer, saying that he was too old to do the job. And so he started out by saying, look, I do 40 plus minutes 7 days a week on the stair stepper. What did he say, 80 or was it 90? It was 80 flights of stairs he does every day, and said he didn't think Kimberly Yee could do that. So I suggested that we have a Republican primary exercise contest. Would you be willing to go head to head with Andy Biggs on the stair stepper?
I would love it. I would. Well, no, I'm not doing the stair stepper.
Okay.
I climb mountains.
Oh, okay.
And Squaw Peak is actually 102 flights of stairs.
Wow.
Piestewa Peak, excuse me. But, Piestewa, Camelback, Phoenix Mountain Preserves, I'll do it every day.
All right. I want to see that. That one I'd definitely be around for because I love the views from up there, right?
Yeah.
So, well, thank you so much, Karrin Taylor Robson. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
It's really been a pleasure. And thank you for watching the AZ Political Podcast. I'm Jim Sharpe, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching the AZ Political Podcast with Jim Sharpe. Click the box to watch more from KTAR News and tap the button in the middle to subscribe.